Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and this is Lost Film File on Steven Spielberg's Firelight. Now, Steven Spielberg is one of the most important and influential directors of all time. And when you ask most people what his first feature was, they would say Duel, which was sort of an early precursor of Jaws, about a man being chased by a truck. It was a TV movie that was very well reviewed and even released overseas. But that is not actually his first feature. His actual first feature is Firelight from 1964. And it was only screened publicly once and then lost forever. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Although Steven Spielberg is mostly known as kind of, and if you hear most biographies about him, it's like how he kind of learned on the Universal lot, and he did a lot of TV work, and he met Joan Crawford, and all this cool stuff, which is all true. But this is about what happened before that. Now, there are kind of debates on what even his first sort of studio kind of professional film is, as he directed a feature-length episode of the show Name of the Game called LA 2017, which is kind of like a future dystopian thing. I've actually never seen it. I'm actually very curious to see it because that sounds really cool. I don't know the name of the game, and apparently that episode is not reflective of that show whatsoever because it's like a dream episode or something. But before all that, he was kind of a small, sort of like scrappy kid independent filmmaker. And he made stuff with his dad's home movie camera. His dad would help him make these movies and get him permission and things like that. He made a couple of films. In 1959, he made The Last Gun, which I didn't find any footage of that. There was some footage you can find of his film Fighter Squad, which came out in 1961, or at least that's the date with it. And then his bigger short that won prizes and awards was Escape to Nowhere, also from 1961, sort of starting off his making two things in a year thing that would continue on up until, I guess, recently, which I guess was a thing for him. Even actually, what's interesting is the films that were considered his first two kind of features, both Duel and LA 2017, came out in 1971. So this whole Jurassic Park, Schindler's List 1993 thing has been going on since the beginning. But what is Firelight? Firelight was a small UFO film that is sort of more reminiscent of Close Encounters. It's sort of interesting what we consider his first feature that people consider a first feature, Duel. It would be an early precursor of Jaws, and this is sort of an early precursor of Close Encounters. It was actually kind of a long movie, apparently about 140 minutes. We don't really know, but that's what the information that's provided. I will say I did try to research all of this, but some of this feels like rumor and legend. Some of it I could get confirmed through actual interviews of Steven Spielberg, but I understand because we're dealing in early Spielberg, it feels more of this as sort of legend than actual fact, but we'll see. So basically what he did is he wanted to make this small kind of alien invasion kind of a movie. To do this, he had $500 and he needed to find actors, but since he was sort of a younger guy, he was in high school, he was 17 when he directed this, believe it or not, he went to the local college, went to the drama department at the local college, ASU, or Arizona State University, because he felt college kids look like grown-ups, or at least to him. So even though it was a kid directing, and in his previous shorts he had his friends who were kids in it, this would look like an adult movie, which is kind of shows you he's not only a good director, he's very good at producing as well. There's another kind of version of that I've seen placed, that he went to the Arcadia High School and got people who are in Guys and Dolls and I Remember Mama. It seemed to me, from most interviews, he's told the story of ASU, so I'm going with that one, and that's a better story anyway. He said he got most of the funds and so forth from friends and family and things like that. To my understanding, his dad was very supportive, so I think it was mostly his dad. He even composed his own score, because he didn't know John Williams then, which he composed on his clarinet, and then his mom made into sheet music, and then the Arcadia High School marching band helped make the actual score to it. We don't really hear much of whatever that score was in the surviving footage we have of this film, but that's at least what the legend that we've been told. It was a very ragtag kind of production. He actually has one scene in the footage that we do have of someone with that looks like blood, but he just used this thing called Cherry's Jubilee on someone's face to kind of, people have said it's reminiscent of the Poltergeist kind of, face melting scene and so forth. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I can sort of see it. It shows kind of the smart tactics he was trying, low budget indie filmmaking tactics he was making to kind of get this movie to work. Now, Firelight actually premiered and was advertised all over kind of the Phoenix, Arizona area, I'm assuming, and newspapers and so forth, to play at the Phoenix Little Theater, one night, and there were 500 seats, and it was $1 to get in. And they actually, because the film total cost $500, although did he put advertising into that? I don't know. Regardless, supposedly he counted the receipts and they had $501, so it made a profit. His first feature made a profit. He's very proud of that. That's a cute little story. Again, not sure if it's true, but I'll take his word for it. But then after premiering this film, he took the film to Los Angeles to hunt for a job, and he actually found a producer from a production company and gave him 2 reels of his film. And then unfortunately, when he went back to kind of find the production company and maybe either get a job or get his movie back, the production company had gone bankrupt. Now, I have not been able to find out what production company this was, what producer it was, and no one's been able to find out what happened to these 2 reels of film. And so after that, Steven Spielberg's first feature was effectively lost. But we do have about 3 minutes and 40 seconds of footage, which we'll be playing throughout this video, of the film, which I'm assuming is from the first reel, presumably more that he found along the way. Now, if you're wondering, like, is this at all important, even though Steven Spielberg's such a name and his other films are influential, is, from what we have and what we know about this film, sort of important. And although at first I was like, well, just because it has UFOs in it, does it really mean there's that much of a precursor to Close Encounters? And I actually watched Close Encounters again, which was sort of a treat for me because I hadn't seen it in a while. It was really great. I watched the original version because I ain't no sellout. Now, first off, it should be noted, like, we have a plot description. I'm not sure, to my understanding, the screen, like, for the public only once. So I don't know how we have this plot description. I don't know who gave it this plot description. It seems to be kind of uniform everywhere, so I'm just going to sort of go with that. But from what he said in interviews, parts of this sound accurate to me. This was his first science fiction film, which I think is a big deal. It's also his first film with UFOs, which would, obviously be in Close Encounters, E.T., and War of the Worlds later. So I would say it actually is. And I did actually find some kind of things that were similar in both Close Encounters and this, even in the footage I found and from what I can read, and from what I can read from this plot description. Now, I'm going to read off this plot description. Firelight follows a group of scientists, particularly Tom Carchery and the UFO believer Howard Richards, as they investigate a series of colored lights in the sky and the subsequent disappearance of people, animals, and objects from the fictional American town of Freeport, Arizona. Among these abducted are a dog, a unit of soldiers, and a young girl named Lisa, whose abduction includes a heart attack in her mother. The film has subplots involving marital discord between Karcher and his wife Debbie, and the obsessive quest of Richards to convince the CIA that alien life exists. The twist comes as the aliens, represented by 3 shadows, reveal their purpose: to transport Freeport to their home planet Altaris and create a human zoo. That doesn't really sound like any of his other UFO things. Marital strife is something that goes throughout all his films, mostly because of what happened with his own parents' divorce, but you see that in Close Encounters and actually E.T. as well. So there's sort of a close approximation there, and you can kind of see like people trying to convince the government or convince people that aliens are real. You would also see in Close Encounters, as well as like there's this, from the footage you can actually see there's this little red light. Although there's a lot of cool UFO spaceships in Close Encounters, there is a little red light in there. And I'm kind of wondering if that's kind of a callback or something that he was really into and carried over to Close Encounters. Child being abducted is obviously in Close Encounters as well. You can see that in the footage, as well as you hear that in the plot description. So that's a similarity as well. And the idea of UFOs were a big thing for Steven Spielberg. He's admitted he's not as into it as he was in the 1970s, a little more cynical about it. But he also, Close Encounters is one of the few films he actually has a writing credit on. So looking at this, and which obviously I'm assuming he wrote, I'm pretty sure he wrote, that he'd carry over to this kind of shows an extra level there. He's even said, in the Inside the Actors Studio with Steven Spielberg, James Lipton says the line that Firelight was the spark that lit Close Encounters, which people attribute that quote to Spielberg, but James Lipton said it, and Spielberg nodded and agreed. It was very hard to rip that episode, unfortunately, if I don't have clips from it in this. I think the interesting thing about, from what I've seen from the footage and what I can read about it, is when you look at what Steven Spielberg did in his directorial career and you look at what he represented and what Lucas in that whole era, the late 70s kind of beginning of blockbuster represented, it was really like taking B movies and directing them at an A level, which is something you would see in Jaws and Indiana Jones. This is just really him making a kind of UFO kind of drive-in sort of film. It's almost like the most pure B movie kind of thing that Spielberg ever did. Now, we can't see this film, so I'm sort of interjecting from what little I know, but it's sort of interesting to me that someone who kind of blew up because people go, oh, that reminds me of seeing like a great horror movie, that reminds me of the great serials, and he doesn't direct it like it's a cheap kind of disposable movie like those films were. He directs it as like, kind of a great auteur kind of a director. And it's sort of interesting when he was sort of warming up before he became that well-toned, great TV and film director. He just kind of made a fun B-movie in Arizona and had it play in theaters. And it's kind of sort of a shame we can't see that film at all, and we only have, the 3 minutes and 46 seconds, because it kind of gives you kind of an insight on what he was like before he went through all that training, made things like Duel and Jaws and all the films we know him for today. The plot kind of thickens on this one because there's an extra kind of story to it. In the 80s, I'm not sure which date exactly, but Kathleen Kennedy, who was originally Steven Spielberg's assistant and then became a producer, and now everyone hates her, and she's the second most Oscar-nominated producer of all time, and I think has contributed a lot to film history. But she was contacted by someone from Lookout Mountain, Arizona, actually. They said they have on a box all these home movies that they think belong to Steven Spielberg. And at first, she thought this is probably somebody who wants some money or something, but it was, she checked, and, obviously Steven Spielberg made all of his early stuff in Arizona because he was living there, as well as Firelight. And he'd actually thought that all these films were long gone, that he'd never find them again, was actually kind of really happy that someone had them, and they actually took on these films and wanted to restore them. But, he's Steven Spielberg in the 80s. He doesn't have time for that. So, actually, Kathleen Kennedy had picked up a newspaper that morning and read about these kids who had just won an award for a short they made that had screened at this theater called the New Art Theater. And so she asked, could hire these kids to clean these films up and transfer them to tape and stuff. And Steven Spielberg was like, oh, that's great. And I can get my home movies back and everything like that. And those two kids were J.J. Abrams and Matt Reeves. J.J. Abrams is, J.J. Abrams. And Matt Reeves directed Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, War of the Planet of the Apes, and is now directing The Batman. Yes, the J.J. Abrams-Kathleen Kennedy relationship goes back to the 80s. They were called to help restore Steven Spielberg's early films. Now, I did check because I had heard this story before. They were about 15, 16. They were in their teen years. They were about the age that Steven Spielberg was when he was making, Firelight and stuff like that. But I thought, well, maybe it's not Firelight because that's considered lost and everything like that. We only have this 3 minute, 40 seconds and all this stuff. We don't have anything more than that. But I was able to find, I was able to find an answer that he did on Choreo or something, and he said this, and I'll read this now. Yes, Matt Reeves and I were asked to help prepare two films Steven made when he was a teenager. One was called Firelight, the other was Escape to Nowhere. Matt and I were 16 years old and had just been in a Super 8 film festival. The LA Times wrote an article about it. Steven saw it, and as an assistant, Kathleen Kennedy at the time contacted us and asked if we'd be interested in repairing them. We thought it was a prank phone call. We did the repairs and made $300, but we never met Mr. Spielberg himself. I'm pretty sure they've met Spielberg since then. But that confirms, maybe that's where they got the 3 minutes 46 seconds from. Maybe Steven Spielberg has more of Firelight than we are led to believe. Maybe he doesn't want us to see Firelight because it totally sucks. I don't know. But it is interesting to note that the footage that we've seen was restored by J.J. Abrams and Matt Reeves. They helped restore that and transfer it, maybe as well as Escape to Nowhere. I don't know what happened to his films that he had, or the one reel, but the fact that part of this story involves, two of the biggest directors currently is kind of a nice, interesting twist on it. I actually think it would be really helpful for a lot of film students, as Steven Spielberg's influence is so large, to actually see this film. And if he has more footage of it, maybe he doesn't, maybe what this guy who contacted him from Arizona had was all we have of Firelight. That might be true. Or maybe, he's just too embarrassed of it. But I would like to see it. I only learned about this lost film recently, and I was immediately fascinated by it. I'm like, are you telling me there's a Steven Spielberg feature I haven't seen and most film lovers and movie lovers haven't gotten to see because it's lost? And the first one isn't Duel? I was shocked. So I also didn't know about the name of the game LA 2017 thing, but I was really surprised by that. So I do think this is one of the more interesting lost films because it's a pretty big modern filmmaker. This was only made in 1964, and think about everything that Close Encounters influenced. Think about everything that E.T., all of his other films that aren't UFO related also. This is kind of the first feature of all of that, but especially a lot of the UFO stuff that he would later use in other features. So I would love for someone, if whatever production company that was, or whoever has those 2 reels, if they still have them, or even if Steven Spielberg still has it, I don't think you'd release it on Netflix because he hates them, or just upload it to YouTube. I don't need like a Blu-ray transfer or something. I think young filmmakers would love it, and it's just like kind of a cool cinephile find. The first Steven Spielberg feature film is a film that none of us can see, and anyone who has seen saw it a very long time ago. And it's unfortunate we can't see it. It's interesting to think about where he started and all of the lore that this film encapsulates is kind of a fun story. So I like the story, but I would one day like to see this movie, because I think actually the world would maybe be a more interesting place if we had it, or at least that's what I've said. But I guess we'll just watch the skies to hope maybe we can see it again. So that was what I found about Steven Spielberg's Firelight. If you have any information or would like to talk about what you think of this story, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.